ってきた。危ない。
When you spend as much time on the road as I do, you start to hear things. Some truckers tell ghost stories, others talk about legends of fatal accidents, but what happened to me one night a couple of years ago is something that still makes my skin crawl. It was a long trip, as usual. I was hauling a load of construction materials from Chihuahua to Monterrey. Everything was fine, the weather was calm and the highway almost empty. The only thing that worried me was the diesel tank. I had calculated that I had just enough to reach the next big truck stop, but for some reason, the level was dropping faster than normal. I figured maybe the gauge was broken, but I didn't want to risk it. Then I saw an old, half-rusted sign that read, "Gas station in 2 kilometers." That struck me as strange, because I didn't remember ever seeing it before on that stretch of road, and I've traveled the highway 1,000 times. Still, I didn't think twice. I slowed down and took the detour toward the station. The place looked exactly how I imagined when I saw the sign, small, with a couple of old pumps and a convenience store beside them. But the strangest thing was, there was nobody around. I got out, looked around, and even shouted a couple of times to see if someone would come out, but nothing. The only sign of life was a note taped to the store door that said, "Back soon." I waited a while by the truck, but the atmosphere felt wrong. There was almost no sound, not even crickets. Just a heavy silence. Then I heard it, a dragging noise, like something being pulled across the ground. It came from the bathrooms at the back of the station. I'm not the kind who scares easily, but a shiver went down my spine. I thought maybe someone was hurt, so I went to check. As I got closer, I saw the bathroom door slightly open, moving as if someone was inside. I called out, asking if everything was all right, but got no answer. I pushed the door carefully, and the moment I stepped in, I knew something was wrong. The bathroom was freezing. Not the kind of cold you get from night air, this was the kind that cuts through your bones. On the mirror, there were handprints, pressed hard, smeared across the glass. But they weren't normal. They were small and elongated, as if left by something not human. I didn't stay long. I rushed back to the truck. When I climbed in and tried to start it, the engine wouldn't respond. I turned the key again and again, nothing. It was as if the battery had suddenly died. By then, my nerves were shot. I kept looking at the mirrors, expecting to see someone, but everything outside was just as empty. Then I felt it, that undeniable sensation that someone is watching you. I didn't see it right away, but I knew it was there. I looked toward the store, and I saw it, a dark figure, motionless, standing by the entrance. No clear features, just a tall black silhouette that seemed to be staring directly at me. I don't know where I found the courage, but I turned the key one more time, and the engine roared to life. I threw it into gear and drove off like my life depended on it. I didn't look back until I had driven a good distance, but when I finally did, the figure was still there. Standing in the same spot. Watching me. I reached a truck stop a couple of hours later. My hands were shaking when I climbed out. I went straight into the diner and ordered a coffee to calm myself down. There were a couple of truckers at the counter, and after a while, I worked up the courage to tell them what had happened. One of them, an older man, stopped eating and gave me a serious look. He asked if it was the gas station at the detail before kilometer 40. I told him yes, and he just shook his head. He said that place had been closed for more than 10 years. That the owner had disappeared, along with several drivers who had stopped there. No one knows exactly what happened, but ever since, nobody dares pull in. I don't know what I saw that night. But ever since then, I always make sure to fill up before taking a lonely stretch of highway. I never trust gas stations I don't recognize anymore. Good evening, Prater. Let me tell you that I'm not the kind of man who scares easily. I've been driving trucks for more than 20 years, and in this job you run into everything: storms, robberies, impossible roads. But what happened to me a few years ago still lingers in my head. Every time I think about it, I can't help but feel a chill. It was a normal trip, one of those you do almost on autopilot. I was hauling a load of auto parts from New Mexico to Texas, a route I knew by heart. The night was calm and the highway completely empty. I had already passed the most complicated stretch of road and only had a couple of hours left to go. But as often happens, fatigue started to hit me. I didn't want to stop, but I knew I couldn't risk driving like that, so I decided to pull over at a roadside stop I saw in the distance. I didn't recognize the place right away, but it didn't seem strange either. It was right off the highway, with a small parking lot, a store, and a pair of bathrooms in the back. The lights were on, but they weren't bright, dim, as if they were old and worn out. I parked, turned off the engine, and got out to stretch my legs. The silence was the first thing that felt wrong. There was no usual noise of other trucks, no radio, nothing. I thought maybe it was just too late and everyone else was already asleep, so I went into the store to buy a coffee to help me stay awake. Inside was an attendant, an older man who barely lifted his eyes when I walked in. His expression caught my attention. He wasn't exactly serious, but his smile was uncomfortable. Like he was trying to look friendly, but it didn't feel genuine. In the back of the store, two men sat at a table. They weren't eating, they weren't talking, just sitting there, glancing at me from time to time. I paid for the coffee, and the attendant asked me something that stuck with me. He asked, "Are you traveling alone?" I laughed nervously and said yes. He stared at me for a few seconds before handing me the change, as if he were evaluating me. I tried not to think too much about it, but the uneasy feeling was already there. I left the store with my coffee and walked toward my truck. That's when I noticed the driver's door was slightly open. And let me tell you, I'm very careful about that. I always lock my doors, especially on the road. I figured maybe I had been careless from the fatigue, but something didn't add up. I quickly checked inside the cab. Everything was in its place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in there. I decided to start the engine and leave, but as I pulled away from the stop, I began to notice strange things. The side mirrors were slightly adjusted, as if someone had moved them. I always set them before driving, so there was no way they should have been like that. I also noticed a strange smell in the cab, like sweat, but I knew it wasn't mine. I tried not to dwell on it and focused on the road. But the uneasiness wouldn't go away. Every time I looked at the mirrors, I had the impression something was wrong. Once, just for a second, I thought I saw a reflection that wasn't mine. Something small, a shadow, that vanished immediately. I figured maybe the fatigue or caffeine was messing with my head. I decided to stop at the next service station to calm down. When I arrived, there were several trucks parked, and that made me feel safer. I got down and went into the restaurant, and that's when things took another turn. There was a group of truckers sitting together, talking. I joined with my coffee, and one older driver greeted me. We started chatting, and for some reason, I felt like I could tell him what had just happened. I told him about the stop, the strange way the attendant looked at me, and the two silent men in the back. I also mentioned the open door and the mirrors. When I finished, the man looked at me seriously. He asked me exactly where that stop was. I explained the stretch of road, and as soon as I did, his expression changed, concerned. He told me something that froze me. That place is known among us. We don't think it's ghosts or demons, but it's not safe either. Many travelers have stopped there and later disappeared. Nobody knows exactly what happens, but the rumors say it's no coincidence. Those people aren't there by accident. Another trucker, who had been listening, chimed in. He said that years ago, a friend of his stopped at that same place and never came back home. They found him days later, abandoned in his truck miles away from that stretch. His cargo was intact, but the trailer had marks, like someone had tried to force their way in. I didn't know what to think. On one hand, everything they were saying made sense. On the other, it seemed too much. Was something strange, something beyond the ordinary, happening there? Or was it more likely just people with bad intentions taking advantage of lonely highways? Neither option made me feel better. I went back to my truck still uneasy. I checked everything again, mirrors, doors, the cab. Everything seemed fine, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone had been there. I got behind the wheel and drove off, but I couldn't stop glancing at the mirrors as I left. That night I finished the route without further trouble, but when I arrived at my destination, I couldn't sleep. The thoughts kept circling my head. What really happened at that stop? Was it something paranormal, like some believe, or just a group of people taking advantage of travelers on lonely roads? To this day, I don't have the answer, and that's what disturbs me the most. Sometimes, during my night drives, the memories come back, and I wonder what might have happened if I had stayed just a little longer, if I hadn't been so cautious, if I hadn't driven away in time. Maybe I'll never know. But I did learn one thing: on the road, it doesn't matter if the danger is paranormal or human, you always have to stay alert and never trust what seems ordinary. And above all, never stop at places you don't recognize. My name is Ramos, and I've been on the road for more than 20 years. I'm not the kind of man who believes in ghosts or things like that, but after what happened to me a few years ago, I can't explain it with logic. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I think about it, and I still feel a knot in my stomach. It was a calm winter night, the kind of cold that cuts straight to the bone. I had just made a delivery in a small town near the border and needed to return to the city with the trailer empty. It wasn't a long trip, and at that hour I figured I could make it back without traffic. I just wanted to get there quickly and rest. The trip started out normal. The highway was completely empty, no cars, no lights, nothing. The wind was strong, and the echo inside the empty trailer made everything rumble. Sometimes the wind through the box makes strange noises, but I was used to that by then. However, after rounding a sharp curve, I heard something that made me grip the wheel tightly. It sounded like a heavy thud inside the trailer, as if someone had dropped something big. I didn't think much of it. I figured it was just the usual noise from the trailer hitting a bump. But then I heard another thud, louder this time, and after that, something that sounded like footsteps. I pulled over on the side of the highway with the intention of checking it out. I got down from the truck with a flashlight in hand and walked toward the trailer. The door was locked with the padlock still intact, exactly as I had left it after my last load. I opened it, shined the flashlight inside, and there was absolutely nothing. Just cold metal walls and an echo that made the space feel bigger than it really was. I sighed, closed up the trailer, and kept driving. I told myself it had to be the usual noises of an empty box in the wind. But as I continued, the sounds didn't stop, they grew clearer. Footsteps, crossing from one side to the other, slow and deliberate. Then came a soft knock against the wall, as if someone were tapping from inside. I tried to ignore it. I turned up the radio, but the sounds kept going. The worst part came when, in the side mirror, I saw something that froze my blood, a handprint, clear in the dust on the trailer. And I know it hadn't been there before. I had checked the trailer myself, and it was clean just hours earlier. The handprint was fresh, as if someone had pressed it from the inside. I decided to stop again. My heart was pounding as I got out, feeling a strange energy in the air, like a presence I couldn't see. I opened the trailer door, this time more out of fear than curiosity. The inside was empty, just like before, but this time I noticed something on the floor that hadn't been there earlier, shoe prints, as if someone had been walking around inside. I slammed the door shut, even more anxious than before. I tried to convince myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe they were old marks I just hadn't noticed. I got back behind the wheel, but now I couldn't focus. My eyes kept going to the mirrors, dreading what else I might see. The noises didn't just continue, they grew worse. Loud bangs, almost frantic, as if someone was trapped inside and desperate to get out. Then came something I'll never forget, the whisper. Faint, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like a weak, tired voice, pleading. I hit the accelerator. I didn't care what was happening, I just wanted to reach the next town. But then the trailer began to feel heavier. The truck slowed down as though I were hauling tons of weight, even though it was empty. The gauges all looked normal, but I could feel it. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw the lights of a small town. I pulled into a roadside diner where truckers often stop. The moment I stepped out of the truck, I felt like a weight had been lifted from me. Inside, I ordered a coffee and tried to steady myself. Some fellow drivers were there, and one of them, an old friend named Julian, noticed something was wrong. He asked me what was going on, and though I hesitated, I ended up telling him everything. At first, he laughed, saying I was just overtired. But when I mentioned the handprints and the whispers, his expression changed completely. Julian stayed silent for a moment, then told me something that made my stomach drop. That trailer had a history I didn't know. Years earlier, a group of migrants had hidden inside it to cross the border. The driver back then didn't know they were in there. When he was stopped at a checkpoint, he panicked and left them locked inside. No one found them in time, and they all suffocated. Since then, several drivers had reported strange things when hauling that same trailer, empty, noises, whispers, and the feeling that it grew heavier on the road. Julian told me the best thing I could do was deliver it back and forget about it. That night I slept at the diner. I didn't dare go back to the truck. The next day I drove straight to the base and handed the trailer over. I didn't explain anything. I just wanted it off my hands. Ever since then, whenever I take that route, I remember what happened. Maybe it was nerves, exhaustion, or some mix of the two. But there's one thing I can't get out of my mind, those handprints, so clear in the dust, like someone desperately trying to get out. There are things in this world we'll never understand, and I think that night I stumbled into something I wasn't supposed to. Now, whenever I hear strange noises in my truck, I can't help but glance at the mirror, hoping I don't see anything. And I pray I never again get stuck with an empty trailer like that. I was never one to believe in strange things. I always thought truckers, spending so much time alone, sometimes invent stories just to stay awake. But that experience left me with a chill I can't shake, even now. Telling it makes my skin crawl. Everything happened on a trip I made into the mountains a couple of years ago. The company I worked for sent me to transport heavy machinery to a construction site in a remote village. The route was a mountain road, lonely and full of dangerous curves, the kind that don't let you see what's ahead and are barely paved. I had heard stories about that road, especially in the winter when the fog drops so thick you can barely see your own hands in front of you. But this time, I had to make the trip in the middle of summer, so I thought there wouldn't be any problem. The trip was long, and as usual, I started my journey at dawn to avoid traffic and save time. At first everything was fine. I was listening to the radio and keeping alert, but the further I got from the city, the weaker the signal became. Suddenly, the only thing accompanying me was the sound of the engine and the wind on the road, which, to be honest, I even enjoyed. After about 6 hours, already in the afternoon, I decided to make a stop in a small town to stretch my legs and grab something to eat. I stopped at a little gas station store, bought a coffee and a couple of snacks, and was about to head back to the truck when, turning around, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There was a dog standing a few meters from me. A big, black dog, one of those that looks like it came straight out of a legend. Its fur was patchy, and its eyes were deep, expressionless. It just stared at me. And it wasn't like one of those dogs that wag their tails or come closer looking for food. No, this one just stood there, still, watching me without moving an inch. I ignored it and went back to the truck, thinking it was just another stray. But not long after leaving the town, when I had already forgotten about the dog, there it was again. On the side of the road, as if it had been waiting for me. That really surprised me, because I couldn't explain how it had gotten there so quickly. I wasn't scared, just puzzled. But there was something in its gaze. I can't explain it, but I felt as if it were warning me about something. I felt uneasy, so I sped up a little and kept going. The road got more complicated as I climbed higher into the mountains, and the sky began to cloud over. Night was falling, and the light grew dimmer. Right before a sharp curve, among the bushes and trees, I saw it again. The dog was there, on the side of the road, in that same motionless stance, staring at me. But now, with the fog starting to roll in, the whole scene felt sinister. I began to think of those trucker stories about strange things on the highway, and though I laughed a little at the idea, part of me started to feel nervous. I kept driving without stopping, trying to shake off the image, but just as night fully fell, something strange started happening with the truck. First, it was a slight vibration in the steering wheel, but I thought it was the load weight or a pothole, so I didn't pay much attention. Then, I noticed the brakes weren't responding properly, as if they were loose. That scared me, because I knew I would need reliable brakes for those dangerous downhill stretches. I pulled over briefly at a spot where I could stop and quickly check the truck. Nothing seemed wrong, so I got back in and continued, determined to make it to the next stop as fast as possible. Then the last thing I expected happened. On a dangerous curve, while trying to slow down, the brakes failed completely. They didn't respond, and the truck began picking up speed. I tried to control the wheel, but the curve was too sharp, and all I could do was cling to it and pray I wouldn't go over the cliff. And there, right in the middle of the curve, I saw it again, the black dog, standing in the middle of the road. It was staring straight at me, unmoving, as if it had been waiting. It was only a matter of seconds, but in that moment I felt a mix of terror and desperation. I knew I wasn't going to be able to stop, and the only thought in my head was that I didn't want to crash. I closed my eyes and pulled the wheel with all my strength, trying to stay on the road. When I opened them, the truck was already stopped, miraculously without a scratch, and the dog had vanished. I won't lie to you, I stayed there for a few minutes, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no trace of the dog, and the truck, though it had been having brake problems, now seemed to work fine. It was as if it had been a warning, as if that animal had been trying to tell me something, but I hadn't listened. When I got to the next town, I stopped at a gas station to check the truck again and catch my breath. While I was fueling up, an old man approached me, and seeing how pale I was, he asked if I was okay. I told him what had happened, trying not to sound crazy, and he just nodded in silence. Then he said something that left me speechless. That black dog, right? You're not the first to see it. It appears when something bad is about to happen on the road. Some say it's a spirit that protects travelers, others believe it's a bad omen. Since that night, I've never seen the dog again, and it's not like I want to. But every time I drive down a dark, lonely road, I can't help but remember those eyes, that gaze that seemed to know something I didn't. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe that dog really was there to warn me. I don't know. But one thing is certain, after that night, I never look at the road the same way again.